Good evening and welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm Ian, G0VGS, and I'm very excited to bring you a presentation from Steve Morton, G8SFR, who's responsible for processing NOV applications for simplex gateways in the UK. Steve's been involved with amateur radio for over 40 years and with the RSGB for 27 years. He started life in the northwest of England, not that you'd know from his accent these days. He lived in Milton Keynes for a number of years, worked in Cyprus for a couple of years in the early 80s, where he operated as ZC4SM and ZC4EPI. Family life then saw him settle in Kent before moving to France in 2010, but no, he hasn't bought a chateau. He's been active mainly on the VHF and UHF bands, as his early career was spent in HF communications with high-powered transmitters, maintaining them and refurbishing large HF log periodic antennas. Steve admits he's not an expert in any of the different modes we have these days, but to him that doesn't matter. Each transmitter is considered to be either a wanted or an unwanted signal source. He does, however, bring a wealth of experience in frequency assignment to the hobby, something the government actually paid him a salary to do once upon a time. So without further ado, let me introduce Steve Morton, G8SFR. Hi Steve.
Hi.
I hope all is well.
Of course.
It's if all the technology works, it'll be magnificent tonight, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. I do appreciate it, and I think a lot of us out there watching will enjoy tonight's presentation. So thanks very much for coming along and giving us this presentation. I've got a few questions for you at the end, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
So smash in. So without further ado, by all means, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Fingers crossed. This should now go across to me. How's about that? Is that working? Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. I am Steve Morton, G8SFR, or Steve Forever Radiating, as was. So a bit about me, if you don't know about me. I was licensed back in 1979. The last exam that did the full written exam, no less. It wasn't my first attempt, it was my second attempt at doing the RAE. There you go. And I've been licensed in 79, February 79, so well over 40 years now. And as F4 VTF as of 2 years ago. I've been an RSGB volunteer since 1994, all 27 years of it. And it's changed a lot in that time, as you can well imagine, from sort of written applications to sort of semi-online applications to full online applications now, where we don't do anything else. And I'm responsible, or irresponsible, I don't know which, for all NOV applications for simplex gateways, repeater links, that's where the repeater needs an internet connection, but there isn't one on site, and packet radio stations, and renewal of all that lot. And it currently runs to about 460 in total. It went up about 10 in the last week. Such is life. And I also assist with all the frequency assignments for voice repeaters throughout the whole of UK for reasons that will become obvious, I think. I'm now retired, have been for about 10 years. Or just over, in my 11th year, I suppose now. And I spent about 38 years or thereabouts in radio comms as a specialist radio engineer of one sort or another. I started off as a man and boy, literally, with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Then moved to Radio Comms Agency, which then became Ofcom. And then I sort of did my swan song years with the which is the Defence Scientific and Technology Laboratory, or DSTL for short. It's part of MOD anyway. So, why do we need a notice of variation of NOV? Oh, panic, panic, panic. So, the key things in your lifetime license, which is somewhat different to BR68 as was, the last printed version of that I've got is January 2002, which made life a bit easier, I suppose. It talks about unattended and remote control operation. There is a difference between the two. Unattended, if you like, is when you leave the house with no radio in your pocket, maybe just your phone. You don't do anything with your radio equipment whilst you're away from it, and you just go for a walk. But you leave your radio equipment turned on for whatever purpose. It might not do anything when you're out of the house, but if it did, that's classed as being unattended. And remote control, that's when you go out with another radio in your pocket and you remote control your home station. But there are certain clauses in it, in the license, that prevent you from doing certain things, such as 10.3, which I've put into bold, does not permit the licensee to install radio equipment capable of remote control operation for general unsupervised use by other amateurs. That is sort of third party, but you won't see third party written anywhere in the license. And then you've got some other bits further down, such as 10.6 and 10.7, foundation and intermediates. When they're doing remote control, they can only use equipment in the amateur bands, and the communication links are subject to the maximum power level of 500 watts ERP or PP ERP. They confuse that bit there, don't they? And then for full licensees, they can use any communication link. So that means you could use your mobile phone to remote control your station and stuff like that. But that's not all. The other limitations that creep into this are things like she'll only address messages to other amateurs and stations of those amateurs and shall not encrypt these messages. So that, in a way, restricts what you can connect to. So you can't have, say, a packet station that does Google searches or connect your packet station to Facebook and stuff like that. That's what stops WinLink 2000 from being permitted in UK, if you hadn't guessed it already. And then you've got other bits there, messages via mailbox or bulletin board for reception by amateurs. So that it is spelled out there. And then we have recorded and retransmitted messages. This, in a way, sort of, you automatically think of voice, but don't forget recording and then retransmitting can also be sort of voice over internet, sort of packet digipeating and stuff like that. So that's thing. And then they tie it up eventually, and you can see that's where I got the definition from. Of unattended operation means operation of radio equipment by the licensee when the licensee is in a different location to where the radio equipment is located. And remote control is, they sort of specify things there too. So if we go into the actual Ofcom guidance note, which isn't part of the license per se, but it brings together clauses within the license to attempt, if you like, to explain them. And that's the only place where you'll see third-party usage mentioned in any shape or form. I know this has been popping up here, there, and everywhere, and you won't actually see it because they don't actually sort of think, because I don't think it's so easy to define in a court of law. That's most probably the case. So if you are going to apply, and I strongly suggest you do, otherwise, what have I been doing for the last 27 years? So these are some quick guidelines as to what you need to have ready. You need to hold the correct level of license. Now, for that, for majority of NOVs, you have to have a full license, nothing less. The exceptions are you can have simplex voice internet gateway with an intermediate license. However, the eagle-eyed amongst you will spot when you read that NOV, it does say for full license only. They've never bothered changing the wording. It's still kept as an exception and as a privilege, and they can take that away at any time. The only other exceptions are intermediates and foundation licensees can hold an NOV for receive only APRS iGates, and it strictly is receive only, no beaconing whatsoever. So preferably we prefer them to have just like something like an RTL SDR or something like that. Fairly obvious, is this facility already available in your area? Because if it is, you're going to have to, well, not justify why you're applying, but it's going to be even harder to possibly find you a frequency if it's a voice gateway. Make sure your license is up to date. For historic reasons, Ofcom didn't do the renewals of the lifetime license, which have to be done every 5 years. And back in 2012, during the Olympics in London, they cancelled doing any renewals for 2 years. And then when they restarted again and they processed a load of them, nearly all of them came out with this date of 7th of April 2015. And if you've not changed address, that's most probably the issue date on your license. So consequently, it's now more than 5 years old. Sadly, they took away the validation button, so you have to do crazy things like adding a space to your address to get the thing to update the issue date. But that's a no here than there. Know your location, National Grid Reference, Ordnance Survey National Grid Reference. That's quite easy to find these days. There's plenty of websites online. Your lat long in a decimal format, which just makes life easy. So west of Greenwich is minus and then a number. And your IARU locator, mine is IN96VX or something like that, which is well south of UK. Know the details of your station. It's surprising how many people don't. Antenna gain in DBD, not in salesman DBs, as I call them. Most diamond antennas are sold in just dB without reference to what it's against. And I always assume that that's dBi, which is 2.15 dBs higher. And if you know it, your coax loss. So the type of coax and the length, and you can go to any of the sites to work out what the loss will be in the band. And then you really have to realize you're actually providing a service. So whilst the license is intended for experimentation purposes and all the rest of it, you will be potentially restricted in what experimentation you can do if you're up running a gateway, because the gateway has a minimum level of service attached to it, which will be shown in the NOV. It's basically to stop people applying for them and then never ever putting them on air, which has happened. There we go. And then requested call sign. I guess all sorts of call signs being put into that box. And this slide shows all the different variants of what call signs you can have, and as long as it's not already used, obviously. So we've sort of come up with a call sign series over the years. At one time, 70 SEMs or attended ones used to use your own call sign, but we've stopped doing that now because we prefer that they used an actual recognised call sign. So somebody coming into your area that doesn't normally live there will be able to instantly recognise what sort of service it is you're providing from your station, as it were. And they're all the different various types. It's running out of digipeater ones almost, so I think we'll go into the next possible letter fairly soon once we've run them out of them. So the actual application process, there is an actual guide, which I don't think many people read, and it's linked at the bottom there. I think that link's up to date, but if it's under guidance on the website on ukrepeater.net. It's quite a lengthy document. It runs to, I don't know, about 20 odd pages. But right at the back of the document, there is a step-by-step set of instructions which take you through the application. I think the application's split up into about 6 or 7 sections. So it breaks it down to those sections and tells you what you need to put into the various boxes and what have you. So you go online, you fill in the application, you submit your license with an issue date of less than 5 years old. And then just be careful choosing the type of service you're applying for. A lot of people apply for repeaters when they are intending to only apply for a simplex gateway, and that causes a little bit of confusion. It goes to the wrong person to start with. And then at the end of it, once you've clicked all the various boxes and accepted liability, and PayPal hasn't demanded any money from you. No, it's free. You need to take a note of the secure access code because you'll be able to gain access to the actual application to amend it and update it at a later date. But you'll get sent that code if you didn't write it down. So then we come on to the tricky bit. This is where it's landed in my inbox, and as they do frequently. And I run through the thing, and because I've been doing it so long, I'll spot all the obvious errors and try to correct them or ask you for corrections. And then I do an initial assessment based on these parameters. For most bands, I limit them to 3 dBW, ERP, or on 70 SEMs, 7 dBW, which is just a matter of history. These limits have dropped over the years. We used to use far higher, but as things have become more popular, we've had to reduce the power levels. So then set your transmit antenna height to that of the application, so whatever that is, 8 meters, 10 meters, whatever. I use a receive antenna height of 10 meters. And then we use an edge of service area as specified by Ofcom's document OFW 164. It's good bedtime reading, I hasten to add, if you're an insomniac and you can't fall asleep. It's a riveting read. It's basically the technical parameters for assigning private business radio. And, it's well tried and tested. And we use the same thing. So we pick out the bandwidth and the frequency used, and that gives us the service area and co-channel interference area. And those figures for 2 meters are 70 dB microvolts per meter and 5 dB microvolts per meter. And I start off with a search of 100 kilometers square, transmit from the center. Sometimes I have to go bigger than that. Somewhere like Norfolk, where it's very flat, you end up with far bigger coverage areas than desired and what have you. And then the actual calculations, they take into account the terrain and sort of building clutter and forests and stuff like that. And you're going about to see a load of maps. Now, these aren't from a real application. They are hypothetical, but they're quite realistic in terms of what we sort of get to see. So here we have a new application in Tunbridge Wells. I realise it's not an area you might be familiar with, but it's where I used to live over 10 years ago now. So we have a station set up on 2 meters with 3 dBW ERP, and the green area is its coverage area. And where you can see the M25 running through to the M26. That runs through a valley through there, and the M20s similarly just south of the North Downs. That's why it suddenly it drops out on the M20, but it picks up again on the North Downs just above Maidstone. And then to the sort of south, you've got other high ground, so that's where it sort of disappears in that direction, and what have you. So, and the guy said, there's no gateways in my area for whatever service it is on this band or this service or whatever it is, and this can be anything. And then we have an existing gateway. This is a bit further down, southwest of the new one, in a small village north of Worthing and Brighton. And as you can see, if I go back again, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that it's white, i.e. no coverage from this new one, where between the A24 and the A23, where the existing one is. So there's that one between the 24 and the 23 in its coverage area, and it doesn't stretch beyond, it doesn't get anywhere near Tunbridge Wells. So you think, I can't hear a gateway, I can't hear that, it's well beyond my coverage area, which it is. There's the two of them on the same map. Now, we've got small areas of potential problems with the co-channel interference area being slightly overlapping, but the coverage area itself doesn't overlap. So that's, showing promise. But because these are simplex, we have to take into account where the users might be located. So I've added a user, and he's on the A26, which is sort of southwest of the Tunbridge Wells location. And we add him in, and this is what happens. Oh, look, there he is. He's come up again with only 2 watts radiated power, and he doesn't add much further south of him because he's just below the ridge. But if I go back again, you'll see it fills in that gap towards Reigate slightly. Again, not much difference between the two. So I've given him the name of Charles. I don't know if Charles actually exists at all, but he's on the wrong side of the hill to the Cowfold Gateway. He can't get into that, but he's in a good site as far as getting into near Tunbridge Wells. Wonderful. However, what happens when Neville comes online? Neville lives in Newark. You can see the way this is going, can't you? Pick out the names of the towns so I could remember them. Now we have a slight problem. Now we've got this combined coverage area, which it's seamless. And you think, well, so the two users are going to cause interference to each other, but they won't so the guy in red, the user in red, won't cause interference to the Tunbridge Wells gateway. The Tunbridge Wells user doesn't cause interference to the Newark gateway. But the two users potentially cause interference to each other if they happen to be on air at the same time. So taking the gateways away, that's the wrong words, I suppose, we've got that situation where their combined coverage area completely overlaps each other. So it'll be time to look for another channel, I'm afraid, in that situation. That gets completely ruled out. Now, I end up going through this same exercise, stepping through one at a time. Initially, gateway to gateway, just making sure there's no significant overlaps. And this applies to 2 meters, 70 SEMS predominantly, and some of the other bands, although some of the other bands are less occupied, so they're not so bad. Now, in sort of the area where you are up in the northwest, where you have high populations of amateurs, it gets very difficult. So one of my favourite sayings is, in an ideal world, we'd have all the repeaters on hilltops, all simplex gateway access points in Valley Bottom, so they didn't actually spread very far because they are simplex, and this would minimize the interaction between the co-channel gateways and their users. Ideally, the users would be able to hear each other, so they wouldn't double with each other. This idea is similar, if you go back a few years, to how Packet was intended to be. You'd put all the nodes or repeaters on the hilltops, and the actual mailboxes and access points would be in towns, not on hilltops. It's the last thing you want, really. Fusion specifics, because I believe you are fusion enthusiasts. Oh, by the way, I'm no expert in any of these things. I just treat them all as, interference sources from each other. But there we go. So fusion NOVs will all have the preset frequencies included on them. And in UK, we decided on 144.6125, which is the calling channel for DV, and 438.6125. You can tell me, or someone can tell me, how often those are used. I'm not sure, but they're included. And because the guy pushing the button to find out what's in his area is such a short transmission, it shouldn't cause too much interference to people. Fusion systems do cause interference to each other. Surprise, surprise. There's nothing to stop them doing that, unfortunately. And I've had reports of fusion systems blocking up in the presence of a normal FM signal, particularly these micro hubs, which sometimes appear in the 431 megahertz sub-band, which is a bit annoying. But in most cases, the people operating them haven't got a clue, what the band is normally used for, or that sub-band is normally used for, and then they're not aware that they can cause problems. But politely ask them to move to 434 dead or 438 dead or whatever it is in the band plan this week. You can contact me via the website at repeater.net or at one of those email addresses. No phone number, because I'm sure you don't want to be ringing France, but there you go. And thank you. So now we go back, hopefully, to there.
Yay!
Anybody watching?
The system works. Yes, we have. Yes, thanks very much, Steve. Very informative. Just out of interest, you asked the question about preset search frequencies on Fusion. I don't know anybody, and neither do the guys I speak to, who uses one. But it's just one frequency in each band, so I don't think it's an issue. But if anybody watching knows of anybody who uses a preset search frequency, we'd be really interested to learn. So you can either
YouTube on how to set that up on Fusion.
Right. Was that an American video by any reason?
It originally was requested by some guys in near Maidstone, so I got them to test it out initially to see how it worked. In terms, we sort of stuck something on their NOV. And then we managed to get sort of permission to use it globally, sort of thing. And then I had to work out how to add it to an NOV, because normally you can't add frequencies easily. So it appears on the schedule in the notes.
Yeah.
More words.
If anybody does know of anybody in the UK using these frequencies, just let us know on Northwest Fusion Group, or contact Steve via the information you got just before the end of his presentation. I've got some questions for you, Steve.
Go for it.
Some will be easier to answer than others. They're from various people that have emailed me their questions. And if anybody has any further questions that aren't covered in this particular section, please feel free to email Steve with the information. So the first question then, is there an update on changing gateway NOVs to match repeater NOVs with regards to identification? it makes no sense for an FM gateway to ID itself in Morse when most of its users can't read it, and voice identification is simple to achieve. The repeater NOV has no identification requirement. I'm not sure about that last bit, but I will leave it to you.
I can't remember because we've got so many different NOVs that we process that I'm only really familiar with the gateway one and the packet one these days. But yes, there is good reason to keep it. FM, sure enough, you could have a voice announcement maybe, but you can get a bit carried away with voice announcements, popping up every so often. But a good reason for retaining Morse ID is if you've got, say, because the gateways, the digital voice gateways, whilst they're in their own subband, there isn't a different frequency for each different digital voice mode. They're all mixed up. So if you're suddenly getting interference from another gateway or another user of a gateway, and it's a different mode to what your radio can decode, then the Morse ID will tell you which station that is. Now, it could be just simple lift conditions, from where you are, across the Irish Sea to North Wales or something like that, which does happen occasionally.
It does, yeah.
But that's the only real reason. And of course, the other obvious one is the fact that the last time this NOV was updated is some years ago, but that's another story in itself. But I prefer to see it kept just purely so if someone does say to me, I'm getting interference, well, can you tell me who it's from? Oh, no, it's just a noise. I don't know who it is. Well, you should be able to tell from the Morse ID.
Yeah, from my point of view, obviously as a G0, I took my Morse test. It doesn't mean I'm particularly good at it or whether I use it. But I have the ability on my gateway because I have an all-star gateway, for those who don't know. So it's analog, so it requires a Morse ID and or an ID at least. Now, I can do that with either voice or I can do it with Morse. And I find from my point of view that if I use a voice ID to identify the station every 15 minutes, which is the requirement, it's really very distracting when it's it's along with another QSO that's going on, whereas the Morse ID tends not to distract, but still gives an ID out. So hopefully that gives the answer to the question. So we'll move on to number 2. Attended gateways reduce the usefulness of the gateway and often means users have no way of knowing when they may or may not be able to use it. It can also mean that the gateway has to be switched off when in use. Is the ETCC working with Ofcom to make all gateways unattended in the same way repeaters are? Right.
So the main issue with this is any secondary band where we're not primary users, so in other words 4 meters, 70 SEMS, 23 SEMS, etc. They require frequency clearance, which does take some time, and there's no guarantee we will get frequency clearance. Now that could lead to several problems. We could have the situation where I can find you a frequency, but that's then rejected. So therefore, you can't have anything. If all of them have to be unattended, there wouldn't be an unattended only option. Again, it would have to be all or nothing. Additionally, it would cause a disproportionate workload for the primary user. And they're the ones that have requested that we don't overload them with lots of applications. Now, in the case of a repeater, it's normally, well, for starters, the NOV period is 3 years anyway, and they tend to be around for longer than 3 years. A lot of gateways don't get renewed at the end of the first year. People suddenly realise that they've lost the use of a band, So they go at it guns blazing for about a year, and then they think, oh, I've had enough of this. I want to move on to doing something else. So we've gone through a lot of work, and at the end of it, it's just not sustainable, really. So decision was made by RA, later Ofcom, that gateways in secondary bands would be attended only. And I tend to agree with it. It's not too inconvenient. In some cases, we've been able to find channels for some stations because of the attended only option, where they can share a frequency with another station, and they just agree between themselves. I'll do Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and you do Tuesdays, Thursdays, and whatever, and you fight over Saturday and Sunday. Or, one of them will cover during the day because he's retired and he's living at home all the time, and the guy who's out at work during the day, he'll do evenings. So they can split it between the two of them. We don't require formal notification of that. We just need to get agreement from both parties that you agree to share the frequency. It works. I don't know of anybody doing it these days, but it's still an option.
Thank you. Okay, number 3, a particular favourite of mine. With all the recent online discussions around personal hotspots and public gateways, can you please explain what the maximum power level is for a personal hotspot and where this is stated in our license?
It's stated in the schedule to the license, which limits the power for your station on each band. Simple as that. Except for foundations and intermediates, where it specifically says in 10, whatever it was, 10.7 or 10.6, whichever, 500 milliwatts ERP. So you have to take into account your antenna gain and all the rest of it.
The foundation and intermediate. Sorry, the foundation and intermediate thing in that's actually stated is because foundation and intermediate licensees can only use remote control over radio and not over internet.
Yeah. Whereas a full licensee can basically remote control their station to the limits of the license via any means of communication. The thing is in the dreaded BR68, of which I still have a copy.
I don't know where mine's gone. I used to always keep a copy, but I don't know where it is now.
I keep a copy because it was quite amusing. It actually specified in there, and you can view this online still if you really get nostalgic, that it states in here somewhere. It actually gives the bands, and it mentions unattended operation and the power levels and all the rest of it. Sadly, that was all removed from the license when we went to the lifetime license, and it is not very clear now. And I totally agree with whoever asked the question. Where does it state it? It doesn't, apart from the schedule. And go back to what I said earlier, that remote control is when you're actually actively using the station. It's not you're just going for a wander up the beach and you just happen to don't have a radio in your pocket or anything, which is unattended operation, which you're not permitted to do at all. So
no, it's one of my favourite phrases, as you well know, be careful what you wish for.
Yes.
It's a difficult thing. Okay, this is an interesting one. Technically, it's possible to create a fusion analog gateway.
Yeah.
Why is it not possible to get an NOV for that in the same way an NOV is issued for a repeater, say?
You mean dual mode? So analog and digital? No.
Yeah, you can for a repeater, so why not for a gateway?
Because we try to avoid someone who's only listening to analog having to put up with some form of digital hash for, say, 50-60% of the time. So that if he's scanning the band looking for activity and he's within earshot of several gateways, it's easier for him to just be listening to either just a digital or just an analog. The same reasoning is behind why we've stuck to a complete subband for digital only repeaters. The 439, 430 is only digital voice, no analog in that band. There are, I think, 2 exceptions to that rule, which are historic, but won't be gone. We won't go there again because those reasons won't happen again. But those are kept completely separate. The only difference is the 430, 438 band that does permit analog and dual mode, although we try to discourage them where possible.
Okay. Presumably, this is the next question. The NOV renewal dates are stored in some kind of data table.
Yes.
It'd be really useful if NOV holders could be automatically emailed, let's say a month or whatever the time
are.
would be, before the renewal date to ask them to renew. Does that actually happen?
Months to 6 weeks beforehand. However,
right.
Not everyone gets those emails for whatever reason it is.
Oh, right. Okay.
They just sort of fall down the cracks somewhere because somebody might change their email address. Sometimes they bounce, or they just don't see them. However, I would strongly recommend, as we all have a mobile phone which got a calendar in it, or a calendar on the wall, you put down the expiry date and remember to apply for it. 3 or 4 weeks before it expires.
And your expiry date is explained on your NOV.
It's on the front page of the NOV, and it's in the schedule to the NOV.
Okay, thank you. So if my NOV's due for renewal in, let's say, October, how soon can I apply for that renewal?
Generally, sort of 3 or 4 weeks before, although you can cut it down to a sort of a week before, because generally a renewal should only take a few hours to deal with, unless you've changed lots of things or a lot of phone numbers have changed. It should be a fairly simple, clear-cut thing to do. But generally,
is there any minimum time? Well, could I do it after 6 months?
After you've gone, you've got to. You can't have a change before 6 months because Ofcom don't want us sort of sending, a change every week sort of things. They have to process the thing. But once you are into the full sort of 12 months, then generally a couple of weeks before is plenty of notice. I do vary the length of an NOV. Minimum period's 12 months, end of, normally. But sometimes I increment that to, say, 13 or 14 months to try and even out my workload because going back in time, I used to get something like about 70 odd NOVs for renewal in January. Come back after Christmas and you've got 70 coming through the door.
Lovely.
So we've tried to sort of spread them out a bit now. And
so gateway NOVs are normally a year, whereas a repeater NOV is normally 3. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Now, this is an interesting one, and I suspect it's one of those that could be debated for a long time. There are receive-only APRS stations.
Yes.
You mentioned it in your presentation. Even an M3 can have a receive-only APRS station. APRS is quite interesting because it's the one time really where you want overlap, and the more overlap, the better in a lot of ways. So you can have a receive-only APRS station without an NOV. Can there be receive-only gateways?
Well, you can have it without an NOV, but I would caution against doing it. But that's another story.
But if it's receive-only, presumably there's no legal requirement for that, but an NOV would be nice.
Yeah, but where you have to be careful is third-party traffic. In other words, messages from someone else being relayed via your station to another station, even receive only, where it goes through the internet and comes out on RF at the other end somewhere.
Okay, so that wouldn't happen with APRS because it tends to go to an internet location, but or shouldn't happen with APRS at least. So the rest of the question was, can there be receive-only gateways without an NOV?
Not that I'm aware of, because I can't for the life of me work out how that would work. We would still end up having to protect the gateways. If they don't have an NOV, how am I supposed to know where they are and stop them being interfered with? Or think about a mobile station. If you've got, think about where these things are going to be frequency-wise. How would a mobile station, let's say, traveling through the area, know what frequency to use in a particular area? If it's not transmitting, if it's on the same frequency as the gateway, then potentially that mobile station could get to somewhere on its journey where it's picked up by both the actual gateway itself and the receive-only gateway, receive-only point, if you like.
And we don't know where the receive-only gateway is injecting that information.
Could be.
Okay.
Could go to two separate parts of.
I think that's a huge.
Or wherever.
It's a huge debating point, and I suspect it's something we'll be debating tomorrow on the Squirrel Net on the Fusion Group. But from 7 a.m. if you're interested in listening.
8 o'clock here, so that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, we're on Northwest Fusion Group every morning with the Squirrel Net, so I suspect there'll be some debate on that.
If someone wants to contact me with how they would practically do it, ignoring the NOV side of it for a moment, just the sheer practicality of it, from the point of view of where you would put such a thing, then look into it. But I can't for the life of me see how you would practically do it. There have been talks about having remote receivers for gateways in the past, where you have several gateways, several receivers around, but only a central transmitter.
The Isle of Man has something like that, doesn't it?
They have something similar to that.
Not okay, fine. I say we could probably debate this one all night, so I'm going to move on. We'll be here all night otherwise, and sorry to everybody who's listening. That's an interesting point. You can put stuff in the comments, or you can ask Steve directly, or you can come on and debate it on Northwest Fusion Group. Anyway, it doesn't matter. When NOV procedures change, who negotiates that change with the Ofcom and the primary users? So, from the RSGB's point of view, I guess.
Well, no one actually does it direct with the primary user. They tend to.
Excuse me, I just need Ofcom. Lubrication.
In a past life, I actually worked for Ofcom, so I had to be very careful what I did with an RSGB hat on compared to an Ofcom hat, and what have you. Within RSGB, there is the Spectrum Forum. They have an input into various operating modes. You've got the VHF, UHF microwave managers. They have direct input into Ofcom as well. And in turn, the ETCC chairman, Andrew G8SFR, he also has input into that group as well, and they go off and they have supposedly liaison meetings with Ofcom. I think it's every 6 months or so, but of course in this last year none have taken place at all, because for obvious reasons, because basically no one's going to the offices as much as they used to.
Just like me when I was on the DCC once, I never went to a meeting either. But that's another story and a long time ago.
I found you.
Yes, you said you had, yes, which is quite scary, really. I was hoping I got away with it. A couple of questions left. Can a gateway cross-band from 6 meters to 70 centimeters when there are no available 70 centimeter frequencies available in the area? I find that a bit of a curious question, but you may have a better background on it.
Yeah, this question's come up recently because someone was advised that that was the best way to go forward because of high interference level, local interference levels on 6 meters. The problem you've got with that is the actual NOV states the transmit and the receive frequency, and being simplex, it means in the same band. You can't have something that's in a different band. And crossband becomes a repeater. Simple as that. And of course, a repeater, you do require to have a full license, not an intermediate. You can't break that down.
So I was saying crossband repeaters are possible.
They do exist, yes, but
Right.
they also have a receiver on the band they're transmitting on as well. So you can sort of just go straight in and out on the same band, or you can cross band from one band to another by some means of control, DTMF control or similar. There is one that does 10 meters and 6 meters down in the West Country, but it's also it's a full 6 meter box and it's a full 10 meter box, and you can cross link the two.
And presumably never the twain shall meet. You're either doing one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
not both at the same time.
Okay, we've done really well for time. And I've only got one question left to ask, but anything else you want to mention?
With the cross banding like that is also that you'd still end up having problems with potentially co-channel interference. In 77s, in particular busy area, you're going to have that you're going to have the users coming up in 77s, not on 6 meters. So of course they're going to cause the problems as they did before. So it doesn't really solve the problem.
Okay, thank you. I've just the one question left to ask. I mentioned my particular failure year with the DCC when I was press ganged. But that's another story. If somebody wants to help, and become involved with the ETCC and help to steer all this kind of stuff that you guys are working so hard to do in your spare time.
Yeah.
How do they do that? How do they become involved with the ETCC?
Either contact one of us or contact the chairman predominantly, because effectively as a volunteer member, we all effectively work for the chairman. It's the chairman that carries the can, if you like. He is the one. I've never been chairman.
I wouldn't be either.
So he or she carries the can for anything that happens within the committee, as it were. And the committee's made up of about, I can't remember how many of us there is these days, about 6 or 7 of us. They're all dotted throughout UK, apart from me, who happens to be in France. But that's I just
we'll forgive you.
Carried on, and because it's online, it didn't matter, sort of thing. But they're spread throughout UK. So we've got someone who covers all of Wales. We've got someone who covers Scotland. We've got someone who covers Northern Ireland. We've got someone who covers the south-west of England and the south of west of England. We've got someone who does all of the Midlands. We've got someone who does all of the north. And we've got someone who does sort of southeast sort of quadrant. But I pick up everything for gateways. There's no sort of division of, there's not sort of 6 of me. I just do the whole lot, just through for reasons of, it's just been one of them things over time. I've just carried on doing it. But because, yes, although the renewal dates are spread within a year on gateways, repeaters all used to be renewed on the same date, which I said, you're mad. You've got 600 repeaters to do all in the same month. That's going to work well. Not.
Yeah.
So we've gradually spread those out now over 3 years. Right. And so the guys get to do maybe 1 or 2 a month, if that. I've got mine down to doing 1 or 2 a day.
Rather you than me.
Yeah.
Listen, Steve, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And thanks for doing this talk for us. It's been, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope that everybody watching has enjoyed it too. I'm sure it's brought a few more questions on with people out there. And as I say, you're welcome to put them in the comments below. I'm sure Steve will have a quick browse at the comments over a period of time. But if you want to contact Steve for any reason, his information is earlier in the video, but before we finish, I'll ask you to put that contact slide up again, Steve, full screen if you would. But thank you very much to everybody for coming along and listening tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll hope to do another live stream at some point. I've enjoyed it, although I must admit I've been a little on the nervous side today, wondering whether all the technology would work. It's one thing doing a live stream when it's just you and some slides, and another thing when you've got somebody else involved. So hence I've had to have some lubrication. And if you wonder what the strange movement is, it's because I've got a background on, and it's quite interesting. You can do all sorts of scary things when you've got backgrounds on, but fortunately Linda's not around to start playing with the fluffy rabbit and various things, which is a bit on the odd side. So thanks very much, Steve.
I've
very
got a
much
final
enjoyed
question
the talk. Yeah, go for it.
To the audience in a way, and I've got some possible answers to it. Let them sort of debate the thing, and it'd be interesting to see what they come up with. So that my sort of €64 million question would be: should we retain the NOV system as it is at the moment, and what are the alternatives? Now, the obvious one is include all the permissions that we add into the license terms and conditions. Put me out to pasture, basically. Go on, sod off.
Please, yeah.
But there are problems with that. Would the frequencies that we use now become total chaos if there wasn't an NOV system? Because you can apply for an NOV and it's up to me to actually assign you a frequency. You have some input on it, but not the final say. Or would people prefer to retain the current NOV system that we have now, but bring in an element of self-regulation? The applicant chooses the frequency and power to within a certain level, of course, but then any problems have to be sorted out by the applicant and the other parties they're impacting on, either by reducing power or requesting a frequency change after they've tested it or whatever. Or, so ETCC would vet the initial application, correct any data and stuff like that, and renew it as now, but not decide on the frequency within the band or power level. So we would be taken away from that bit of it. So whether this could actually happen, I really don't know. I think Ofcom would prefer it if we did, because I would imagine that they would get lots of calls saying I'm being interfered with and all the rest of it. I'm getting interference on this band and all, and you'd be talking to a call centre. I haven't got a clue, unfortunately. And nice people though they are. I can see advantages and disadvantages to it. I think yes, it would free things up a little bit, but I could see in some cases where people would lose out, where people aren't particularly strong in character. How am I going to contact this other person that's causing me interference? Because they may not have an email address or something like that that's visible. So we naturally end up coming back via us again. You know who this other person is, so we end up in the pig in the middle again. So I think for the in the long term, I'm still in a job basically.
It's a great debating point though, and thanks for bringing it up. I'd
be interested to know what people's thoughts are, because nothing's perfect. I realise that, but given the progress of time that I've been involved in the thing. And, you and me have talked about some of the characters from days gone by in packets.
Yeah.
I used to spend, 3 or 4 hours an evening on the phone back then. This is before the days of emails and what have you. And it used to drive my dear wife mad, because we stood out in the blooming hallway for sort of 2 or 3 hours.
Everybody had their phone in the hall. What was that about?
Crazy.
Yeah. Speaking of somebody who used to fit those phones,
but
everybody had them in the hall. I have no idea why. I did. We all did. It's a bizarre thing to do. It's cold out in the hall because we didn't have central
Yeah.
heating then. So yeah, kept the calls short. They
There
were
we go.
expensive.
But no, that's just my thoughts. But if anybody's got any other additional thoughts and things they'd like to see done differently, don't be afraid to speak up. We're open to suggestions.
I think that's great. Again, it can be
Yeah.
put in the comments below. You can email them to
Yeah.
Steve directly or get on radio on Northwest Fusion Group and let's have a well-mannered debate about it. Let's talk about it. We're all radio amateurs. It matters to us, and the people who've logged into this hopefully will take that on board. Thanks very much, Steve. We've done an hour, which is absolutely terrific.
And there's details again.
Oh, yeah.
On repeater.net, you'll find a contacts page that you can just type a message in and it comes through to me automatically. So, there's no escaping it. Thank you. Yes.
Sure, at another time. But thanks very much indeed for.
I'm taking.
Fed up of looking at me. There we go. That's better. Right. Thanks very much. A very good night to you. Have a very pleasant evening. Thanks to everybody for joining in, and to those of you who are watching after the event. I hope you've enjoyed this, and join in. Let's have a debate. Let's talk about it, and it matters as radio amateurs that we talk about these things. So thanks very much, everybody. A very good evening, and we'll catch you all again.